So how do you take those ideas and with breadcrumbs think about arranging them in a kind of path that you'll lead people along? So I kind of think about it like, it's like threading beads onto a string. So you're wanting to stack up this like really nice necklace of ideas and thoughts. Okay, these are a lot of metaphors. There's a path metaphor, a necklace metaphor, and here's a stage metaphor. So my ideal story is one in which every idea gets a literal home in a place. I don't know if you've read Michael Pollan, he wrote The Omnivore's Dilemma. He does this beautifully, where he's talking about corn and how we depend on corn and he's riding in a tractor next to a corn farmer, and he's giving you a scene, he's giving you context, and he's giving you information that's woven throughout that kind of narrative he's setting up. So my ideal scenario is that every idea I present takes place in its own home. And I have to kind of figure out, well, how am I going to decorate that empty set and create a kind of world around it so that the idea inhabits a place? I think it makes the idea more memorable if it occupies a place and time. So it's like, what's the set going to be? Who are the characters going to be? What's the conflict or action? I mean, it's all like it's casting and creating a play. So, Act 1 of this, and thinking about the order. So I thought a lot about the order of like how I was going to talk about these ideas. I couldn't start in the helicopter because there's no context. I had to start on the glacier to give people context for like what's at stake, why are we even here, which is the bathtub ring, and then talk about, well, why did it drop? Okay, there's warmer water. Why is there warmer water? Well, because there's more warmer water flowing in from the North Atlantic. And I realized I could do that where we start on the glacier, hover over the fjord, and then land on the boat. So there's like a kind of movement, a geographic, physical movement through that space. And I realized that I was going to use the helicopter scene for that moment where I talk about why the ice is melting from below. And so I was asking Gordon, so what does this plot mean? I knew that I wanted to use him talking about it. So Act 1, we're on the glacier. Act 2, we're hovering, we're getting this temperature data. So I think, okay, how am I going to populate each of those stages? So in Act 1, I start on the glacier, because part of it's like, I want people to get a sense of just what a grand place this was. I'd never been, is that true? True. I'd never been to a glacier before, like that. That's a caveat. That's a big glacier. I'd never been to a big glacier before. And so I wanted folks to have a sense of it, and I also wanted it to not feel immediately like, I'm never going to go to a glacier. I can't relate. So that's why I started it with Gordon in his bowl of cereal, and then it's kind of like the camera pans up. You look at the cereal, and then you pan up, and it's like, oh my good, and you just see that glacier. And then you can, I mean, if you could get close enough, you can see the bathtub ring in that photo. But then that leads us, as our gaze turns up, we see the bathtub ring, and that sets up the driving question for the story. And then the second act takes place on the helicopter. There's Daniel Sulak with his temperature probe. So that's kind of how I was imagining framing it. And when I think about a scene in the Arctic or the Antarctic, if I were doing science there, I would think about, well, I'm going to sample that place. I'm going to figure out some way to gather data from that space. And maybe with time, my equipment samples it at a higher resolution. This is kind of how I imagine doing science in that space. When I'm doing a story or doing reporting in a space, I'm focusing on a very particular kind of place or part of it. So I'll often in a story take one part and really flesh that out in detail, but I need to give some general context for like why we're there and a general description of the surrounding area.